Counter-terrorism officers are leading the investigation into what's been described as a frenzied knife attack at Manchester Victoria Station. An 11-month-old baby has been found alive in the rubble of a building that collapsed in Russia. NASA has confirmed that the New Horizons spacecraft has successfully photographed an icy object 4 billion miles from Earth. 100 years on, the people of the Western Isles have remembered what they call the crowning sorrow of the First World War. The Mayor of Greater Manchester, Andy Burnham, has condemned what he called a vile attack on families seeking to enjoy a peaceful New Year at a busy railway station in the city last night. Police say a man and a woman sustained multiple wounds in a frenzied assault, which they're treating as a terrorist attack. A police sergeant who was stabbed in the shoulder has been discharged from hospital. Members of the British Transport Police who tackled the knifeman have been praised for their outstanding bravery. A man is being questioned on suspicion of attempted murder. Danny Savage reports from Manchester.
Although Manchester Victoria Station has now reopened, there's little doubt that what happened here just before 9 o'clock last night was terrifying for passengers who saw the attacks. A 25-year-old man was quickly arrested by British Transport Police. One witness said officers swarmed on the attacker within seconds after he began stabbing people on the platform. A BBC journalist, Sam Clack, saw the man wielding a knife and witnessed the arrest.
I heard the man say, as long as you keep bombing these countries, this sort of stuff, and I'm using a cleaner term, if this sort of stuff happens, then this is going to keep happening. This is why he's got pepper spray coming down his face, and while the police are trying to pin him on the ground and he's trying to get up.
As the suspect was put into a police van, he was heard to shout, "God is greatest," in Arabic. The couple attacked last night are both in their 50s and live in the area. They are expected to remain in hospital for some time. The woman has a serious injury to her forehead. The Chief Constable of Greater Manchester Police, Ian Hopkins, has given more details about the investigation.
We are treating this as a terrorist investigation, which is being led by counter-terrorism officers with support from Greater Manchester Police. We're working to piece together the details of what happened and to identify the man who was arrested. Our work will continue to ensure we get to the full facts of what happened and why it took place.
Police have also been searching a semi-detached family home in the Cheetham Hill area of Manchester. Officers are now guarding the property. The Mayor of Greater Manchester, Andy Burnham, has tried to reassure people.
From what I do know, it has all the hallmarks and appears to be an isolated incident. While I would stress that people do need to remain vigilant, they should nevertheless not be unduly alarmed and should continue to go about their daily business.
The BBC understands the security services are assisting police with this investigation, and counter-terrorism officers believe the location of the attack may be a factor too. Victoria Station is adjacent to the Manchester Arena, where a suicide bomber killed 22 people in 2017.
Rescue workers in Russia have pulled an 11-month-old baby boy alive from the rubble of a block of flats which collapsed yesterday. Doctors say he's in a critical condition. The 10-storey building was partially destroyed by a gas explosion in the city of Magnitogorsk, 1,000 miles east of Moscow. At least 8 people died and dozens are unaccounted for. Our Moscow correspondent Sarah Rainsford has sent this report.
Russian rescuers are calling this a New Year miracle. It's the moment they reached baby Ivan, clinging to life beneath the rubble of his home. He'd lain trapped and injured for over 30 hours. The emergency team shouts to hurry as the baby boy is bundled off to hospital. Pyotr Gritsenko describes how they'd found him by following his cries. The baby calmed down as soon as the team reached him, he says. The temperature in Magnitogorsk drops below -20 at night, but Ivan was protected a little by his cot mattress and a blanket. The explosion on New Year's Eve destroyed almost 50 flats. Officials believe it was caused by a gas leak. Poor maintenance and fatal blasts are horribly common here. Baby Ivan's mother and brother were also asleep at home but managed to escape unharmed. Doctors say the infant's condition is serious, though, with frostbite, multiple fractures and a head injury. They plan to fly him to Moscow now for specialist care as the search for the dozens of other people still missing in the ruins goes on.
The family of an American citizen who was arrested in Russia last week on suspicion of spying have protested his innocence. In a statement, they said Paul Whelan was a retired US Marine who was in Moscow for a wedding, adding they were deeply concerned about his safety and well-being. An unmanned NASA spacecraft has made contact with Earth, having successfully flown by the most distant object ever explored in our solar system. The New Horizons probe took huge numbers of photos and other measurements during its encounter with Ultima Thule, an icy world some 4 billion miles away. Researchers hope the information will offer new insights into how planets were formed. As our science correspondent Jonathan Amos reports, news of the success of the mission was announced this afternoon.
We have a healthy spacecraft. We've just accomplished the most distant flyby.
That's it. A phone call from the far side of the solar system. Alice Bowman, New Horizons Mission Operations Manager, or MOM as she's affectionately known, confirmed the contact. The probe had survived its far-flung encounter and had a data bank full of pictures. New Horizons had been commanded to make an extremely close pass of a mountain-sized ball of ice and dust wandering far beyond the planets. Scientists believe Ultima Thule's frozen state could provide new insights into how the whole solar system came into being billions of years ago. The great distance involved made the flyby technically very challenging, but Chief Scientist Alan Stern said his colleagues had triumphed.
All these projects in spaceflight require enormous attention to detail and really smart and dedicated people, and this project's no exception. This team spent 3.5 years working its tail off to really make sure that this would go by the book, and from everything we can tell, they scored a 100 on the test.
New Horizons has begun to send back its images, but they'll come in dribs and drabs. Data rates from the probe's 15-watt transmitter are very slow. It'll be late next year before they're all back on the ground.
A man has died after being stabbed in the West End of London early this morning. 3 other people, 2 men and a woman, were wounded in the incident outside a property in Mayfair. There have been no arrests and police are appealing for witnesses. Tom Harrigan reports.
The attack happened at around 5:30 outside a venue on Park Lane where a private party was taking place. Officers believe a group of men tried to force their way into the event, stabbing 3 male security staff in the process. One of them, believed to be in his early 30s, died at the scene, while 2 others, aged 29 and 37, were injured. A woman who tried to help the security team close the doors was also hurt. Detectives said it was a shocking incident in a particularly busy area of London as people made their way home from other New Year parties. They added that there were many other witnesses they needed to speak to about what happened, some of whom may have filmed the attack on their phones.
In the past hour, the new president of Brazil, Jair Bolsonaro, has been sworn in, becoming the country's first far-right leader since the end of military rule in 1985. In his acceptance speech, Mr. Bolsonaro said these were times of challenge and hope for his country. Our South America correspondent Katie Watson reports from the capital, Brasilia, where crowds gathered to cheer as the president-elect travelled to the ceremony in an open-top vintage Rolls-Royce escorted by cavalry on white horses.
Thousands of Mr. Bolsonaro's fans descended on Congress to witness their president take power. Dressed in green, blue and yellow, the colours of the Brazilian flag, they shouted support for the man they call a legend, a leader they say will change the fate of the country.
We see in his character someone who really loves Brazil. He hates corruption. His feeling for people, it's amazing. That's what captures our hearts. We are feeling so blessed to see what God has done to Brazil. It's a new time. We like Brazilians are so happy and blessed.
It's a hope for Brazil after 13 years of a very corrupt government in Brazil. So now we have a hope that with Bolsonaro we will clean up all this, the bad politics that used to run in Brazil.
Mr. Bolsonaro says he'll do politics differently and get Brazil's struggling economy growing again. He's promised a tough approach to law and order, allowing more people to own guns to combat a growing violent crime problem here. But while those in the crowd in Brasilia are hopeful, many millions fear his conservative politics and aggressive rhetoric, especially towards minority groups, will only make the lives of poorer and more vulnerable Brazilians much worse. Mr. Bolsonaro certainly marks a new political direction for Brazil, but how the country will fare is uncertain.
Police in Western Germany have arrested a 50-year-old man suspected of driving his car into a group of people celebrating the New Year in the city of Bottrop. At least 4 pedestrians, including Syrian and Afghan nationals, were severely injured in what the authorities believe could have been a xenophobic attack. Police say the man made racist comments as he was detained and may be mentally ill. Prince Charles has attended a service of remembrance on the Isle of Lewis to mark the 100th anniversary of one of the UK's worst peacetime disasters at sea. More than 200 men returning home after the end of the First World War died in the early hours of New Year's Day 1919 when the Iolaire hit a reef and sank just yards from the shore. Our correspondent in Inverness, Ian McInnes, has sent this report.
It was a tragedy which changed the Western Isles, remembered 100 years on with a mixture of military pomp and traditional worship. A psalm to honour the 201 men lost barely a mile from Stornoway harbour and the safety of home. 79 people survived, more than half of them were helped ashore by John Finlay MacLeod. He swam to land through the violent seas with a rope and created a rescue line for his comrades. He described in 1973 what was going through his mind at the time.
Just keep yourself afloat and watch out for the waves and don't take the first one, the second, but watch the third one, but it's always the highest. And started hollering to the people about to come one by one.
For many years, the disaster wasn't spoken about, as local historian Katrina Dunn explains.
It has been described as the crowning sorrow of the war. It was just an unspeakable grief, but these commemorations are bringing it to people's attentions again. And I think we are mourning again people we never knew.
At today's service, overlooking the site of the tragedy, Scotland's First Minister Nicola Sturgeon and Prince Charles joined descendants of those on board the Iolaire.
Now, thus says the Lord, He who created you, O Jacob.
The ceremony was the last in a series of events to remember a tragedy that affected every village on the Isle of Lewis, but which was largely forgotten outside the Western Isles.
In the New Year's Day football, Arsenal beat Fulham 4-1 in the Premier League to move within 2 points of Chelsea, who are fourth. Leicester won 1-0 at Everton, while Tottenham are currently in action away at Cardiff. Roger Federer has beaten Serena Williams in a mixed doubles match, the first time the multiple tennis champions have ever competed against each other. Federer's Switzerland saw off the American team of Williams in a round-robin tie at the Hopman Cup in Perth. Federer said it had been an enjoyable but tough encounter.
I was nervous returning because you just don't know. People talk about her serve so much, and I see why it is such a wonderful serve, because you just can't read it. You don't see until the very. I can't read yours either. But it was a great fun and great champion. You see how focused and determined she is, and I love that about her.
8 people in France have been rescued after spending their New Year's Eve trapped on a funfair ride more than 160 feet in the air. The ride malfunctioned in the western city of Rennes. Danny Eberhard has more details.
Suspended aloft at a terrifying height, cold and strapped into seats at the end of a vast metal arm. Hardly the way 8 fairgoers had planned to see in the new year. The attraction, named Bomber Max, had crunched to a halt mid-rotation, sparks flying. Those trapped, one of whom was just 13, were well out of reach of a fireman's ladder. Eventually, a rescuer had to be winched down to them from a helicopter. Relatives below watched anxiously as he winched his charges one by one down to the extended ladder, celebrating as they finally reached safety. The ordeal lasted more than 8 hours. One of those rescued said he'd spend next New Year's Eve at home with champagne and biscuits.
The headlines again. Police are treating a knife attack at a railway station in Manchester as a terrorist incident. Rescuers in Russia have pulled a baby boy alive from the rubble of a block of flats which collapsed yesterday. NASA says its New Horizons space probe has succeeded in photographing the most distant object ever explored in our solar system. BBC News.